Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir une autre fois encore. Moi c'est Crystal Parizo. I'm Crystal Parizo, your host, and we're here today with Mohamed Moreta. Please briefly introduce yourself to our viewers. Before we get into all the details, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, hello viewers, and I know you have lots of them. In case you haven't met, my name is Mohamed Moreta. I'm Dominican, Haitian, and Italian, born Jewish, with an Arabic first name and an Italian last name. I speak 5 languages. I understand 7. I'm a songwriter, record producer, who's been pretending to be a DJ on the radio and in the nightclubs for the past 45 years. So people believe it, and I said, let's just go with it.
All right, so whoa. This introduction, you just have so many things in there. You speak 5 languages.
Yes.
Which are?
English, French, Spanish, Creole, and body language.
Ah, so body Creole.
Je parle 7 langues.
Fonti shout-out by moun haïtien kap gade nou yo.
So, en cas que nous ne parlons pas l'autre, moi, je suis Mohamed Moreta, c'est dominicain, haïtien, italien, juif avec un nom arabe. Moreta, c'est italien, Mohamed, c'est arabe. On parle qui est très important pour moi, l'homme me demande de qui côté. Je dis, c'est haïtien. Je ne suis pas né en Haïti, grands-parents ne sont pas nés en Haïti, maman me fait en Haïti. Mais grands-parents me fait petit sous 2 pays, dominicain et haïtien. Ça veut dire que maman me est dominicaine. I say, what's the difference?
Okay.
I happen to have all these different mixtures, but
Wow.
I choose Haiti. Je choisis Haïti parce que I like being the underdog. Then I could come in and be like, boom.
But let me ask you, you know, there's a period where Haitians were not proud of saying that they were Haitian.
Oh, you see.
Now it's the cool thing.
No, why decide?
Now it's the cool thing, but back in the day.
Listen, you're opening up a can of worms. You should have never said that to me. You know why?
What?
Because I could hit it from the beginning quickly till today. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I don't think you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. When Christopher Columbus discovered the island of Hispaniola, right? And he came back for the first time after discovering gold around their necks. Taino Indians, by the way, Taino means good people. They didn't have the word kill in their vocabulary. It was the richest piece of land on earth. The first time they saw gold around someone's neck. And the first time the word genocide ever happened. You familiar with that? Genocide meaning erasing an entire population. So when Columbus drew the line in the sand, and he told the dark-skinned Indians to come this way, and the light-skinned Indians to come this way, and he eliminated the dark-skinned Indians and made the light-skinned Indians feel like, hey, you're like me. It wasn't cool to be dark, right?
Right.
So when Haiti got their independence, the first black nation on earth to do this, it wasn't cool to be Haitian, right? Because Thomas Jefferson said, if those monkeys think that they're going to influence my slaves, they got something else coming. So it wasn't cool to be Haitian. In 1939, in the Dominican-Haitian War, when something went down on the Dominican side, and they said, anybody that's Haitian, we're going to kill, and they walked up to you and they asked you to say something in Spanish, and if you said it con un acento haitiano, they killed you. They threw up babies and went. It wasn't cool to be Haitian, right? When AIDS came out and they blamed it on Haiti, I got goosebumps. It wasn't cool to be Haitian, right? But when the earthquake happened and all of a sudden everybody found out about Haiti, all of a sudden people who weren't Haitian said they were Haitian to be cool, to jump on the Haitian bandwagon. But I'm here to tell you, I was probably, and I say this with all humility, the first Haitian on the radio who always said I'm Haitian, even though I wasn't born in Haiti. Now, I want to say one last thing before we continue. All the things that I've done in my career, that I've been called a pioneer, I did this first, I did this first. When people say, you were the first Haitian to do this, I'm like, no. I was the first person to do this, and I happen to be Haitian.
Now,
I said it like I was on the Def Jam poetry hour, right?
It was
it
wonderful.
wasn't cool
Wonderful.
to
What?
be Haitian. That's a new poem.
Why you threw it down? Let me ask you now. It's widely known that being Haitian not only became cool when everybody found out about Haiti after the earthquake, but also when Wyclef from Fugees started saying he was Haitian.
Okay. I said, you're opening up a can of worms. Don't get me
Let's
started.
open it up. Let's open it up. That's why we're here.
So before Wyclef ever came to Miami, I was here from 1979 to 1996. In 1994, something very important happened to Wyclef. When he was running for president in Haiti and didn't work out, and Martelly took the lead, he, jumped on the bandwagon. That's what it looked like, because all the Haitians were saying, oh, Kounyon se zami Martelly, ou pas de zami Martelly avant. Ou fait rencontrer, ou propose. They formed press conference. You can check it out. It's on the internet. And the press conference was all about Wyclef telling everybody where he met Martelly. And this is what he said. He go, l'homme de Miami, première fois, yo te paye mon per diem $50 par jour. Meaning, as an artist, he was only getting $50 a day, for per diem. And it was the very first time performing in Miami at the Cameo Theater. Et puis il dit que Martelly vient paraître soudé avec un bel Mercedes. I said, whoa, Little Sweet Mickey, yo, what's up? He goes, yo, I heard a Haitian was going to be performing tonight, so I came to show you love. He let him drive his car for the first time. Et puis, I think he said, c'est la première fois que j'aime conduire une belle machine comme ça. Il rêvait un jour là, une machine comme ça. What he forgot to mention is Mohamed Moretta is the reason why he was in Miami.
You were the Haitian performing.
Who brought him to Miami for the first time to perform at the Cameo Theater.
Interesting.
Yeah, and now, believe it or not, 20-something years later, Jerry Wonder and I have become very close friends, and we've got a new partnership going on. And it's because he remembered that. Not that Clef forgot that, because you can't rewrite history. You can't forget the first time you came to perform on the biggest stage of your career at the time. And by the way, from that day on, when they finished performing, I got on stage after introducing them and after doing the end of the show, and I said, I want everybody to know that from this day forward, Mohamed Moretta is behind the Fugees, and so the rest is history.
Wow.
So you got to be careful when you bring up subjects like that.
No,
I thought it was going to be like a little smooth interview.
I'm glad I did.
People say, it's not cool.
We have to find out things that people don't already know. You know
Let's
what I'm saying?
Let's go. I'm ready.
All right. So, being Haitian, what does that mean to you?
Wow. I can't say it so quickly in this interview. It would take forever. That list is way too long. But I tell you what it means to me. It means being proud. It means remembering, because a lot of people, they want to forget. What I've found in my life is sometimes you walk up to somebody, like for example, let's say I walk up to you and I say, yo, remember when I blah, blah, blah? And you're like, And I want to be like, are you kidding me? Like I want to get upset.
Yeah.
But I realize sometimes people don't want to remember. They don't want to remember when they were, just scratching 2 pennies together to make a nickel. And I get that. I respect that. It's called compartmentalizing your history. But you can't do that. You have to be able to face it, and you have to be able to share it. So in my case, Haiti is what put me on the map, meaning in my career. I left New York as a juvenile delinquent, went to spend a summer vacation in Haiti. It was supposed to be a 3-month vacation. It lasted 7 years. I started on the radio at the age of 11, and now I'm giving back to Haiti what Haiti gave to me. It's part of my pilgrimage. I don't need to take anything from Haiti. Haiti's already given me so much.
Right, right. So tell me, why did it last 7 years instead of 3 months?
Well, like I said, was a pretty bad kid. Not good. You gotta remember, I grew up in New York. I was raised in Queens. I went to a public school, 147, PS 147. I wore a 3-piece suit, a yarmulke, and black shoes and a tie. Imagine a black kid who's Jewish wearing all that. I used to get beat up every day, like literally. I would pack lunch, and right before I got beat up, I'm like, yo, here's some lunch, like leave me alone. But when I went to Haiti for that vacation, it was supposed to be to get away from New York. My cousin, Mario
Did you speak Creole then?
Creole à Telou. They comprend un peu. They want traduit pour famille. A lot of people didn't speak English in the family. So I always was fascinated with language. So when I first went to Haiti for that summer vacation, toward the end of the vacation, I think I had a week left, my cousin Mario, who's Haitian, said to me, let's go to this radio station. There's a guy named Serge Rodriguez who had a radio show in English, but he spoke with a very, like, how you doing? Like, Haitian accent, you know? And I thought, man, radio, I'm 11 years old. I grew up on a station called WNBC, which is huge. So for me, I was like, nah, I don't want to go. Finally, last minute, okay, fine, I go. So he's interviewing me in English, asking me my name, where are you from? The owner of the station, Gérard Rézil, it was called RGR, Radio Progrès. And Gérard Rézil heard me, thought I was a girl, 'cause I sound like a girl. So he said, yo, que belle femme ça, radio. I said, oh, la femme. So I go, and he opens the door, and he starts laughing. I'm like, what's so funny? I'm like, how you doing? Like, why are you laughing at me? Because I was,
Right.
like, hey, I'm from Brooklyn. We beat people up for less than. And he says, well, you speak English well, and how about you work for me? I said, doing what? He said, well, you could start doing commercials.
At 11 years old.
11 years old, I said, hey, I'll think about it. I'll have my people call your people,
Okay.
I go home, I tell my grandma, she calls my mom. My mom starts crying, put him on the phone, I curse her out. I'm saying, I'm going to be a star. She goes, I'll put him in union school, don't worry. And it changed my life.
Wow.
Yeah, and I stayed there 7 years.
So that's how you started in radio.
Oh, yeah. My own radio show. Every afternoon after school, I would get off about a half hour early. And then I went on the air, and kids were driving home. They would tune into me. I was on the AM dial. Let me tell you why that's important. Faut me dire ça, girl. Là, j'ai commencé dans la radio en Haïti, j'ai 11 ans, et j'étais sur une station AM, Radio Progrès. Ça veut dire pour écouter la radio, il faut
Really look deep.
FM, Radio Métropole, Radio Haïti Inter, toute la radio, c'est à vous et monter.
Ouais.
Moi, je me parlais avec petite voix, petit moun, je crasais tout. Parce que la musique que tu as jouée, il n'y a pas de jouer de la même façon de jouer, les gens me parlaient. Vous comprenez? So, je suis un DJ, pas de dire nous, nous connaissons, nous pas connaissons. Ça dépend qui l'âge nous gagne. Jean-Camille was like Casey Kasem, Bob Lemoine, the Whitmires, by the way, the Whitmires owned Metropole.
Yes.
All of them used to listen to me, take notes. And that's how I began to build my audience, one at a time with the union school kids. Going bourgeois. And that's how I was that guy. I was called Mighty Mo, the only way to go on your radio.
What kind of music did you play?
Tout bagay. Everything. Reggae. Well, house music was still in its infancy at the time. It was disco. There was no house music.
Right. Okay.
1973.
Right.
Okay. Après, mon passe, j'ai 30 ans, même j'ai 55 ans.
You look young.
Oh, thank you.
You're very young.
I tell people I'm 18 with 37 years of experience. So là, me demande qui l'âge, je me dis j'ai 18 ans avec 37 ans d'expérience. So that's it. Je me lève chaque jour, tu continues, obligé.
Yeah.
Sinon,
that's what keeps you young.
Go back to sleep.
C'est ça qu'il faut être jeune.
Yeah.
Moun qui était stressé, yo y a grand monde, c'est ça qu'il faut venir grand monde. C'est mental là, qu'il faut grand monde.
Mais Nicole Moreta, last night I performed till 4 o'clock in the morning. Ni la Sudan Explorer.
Mati.
Oh yeah.
What?
Non-stop. And you ready for this? We get home at 5 a.m., barely woke up at 9. She was already on Facebook putting up pictures from, I'm telling you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
That's a
they say
beautiful thing.
the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree.
Obviously.
In my case, the fruit fell on my head.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about when you came back to the States.
To America. Okay. So this interview is all about me. I don't get to ask you any questions?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
They all know about me.
Okay. So, comment on fait là? En anglais?
Kangle, however you want.
Okay. So I came back in 79. Imagine, I got 7 years of radio experience. I'm a kid from Brooklyn with an attitude. I'm like, yo. I go to the local radio station. They're like, really? Like, really? I said, yeah. You might want to, go get some experience. I said, but, no. Go back to the drawing board. So the thing that saved my career is the last year in Haiti, moi ouvri un nightclub avec Cousin. C'était ancien le privé, Pétionville, pas loin de Kazen, Pétionville, là, sur la main gauche, sur montée. Ça fait longtemps que je suis en Haïti. Anyway, so nous changeons nom, nous sommes le Galaxy 2001. Imagine, en 79, nous ouvrons un nightclub qui est le Galaxy 2001.
2000.
C'était toujours avant-gardiste. So that saved my career because I got to play in front of a live audience. Before that, in the radio, you got a room, 4 walls. You don't know what the reaction is. You have the phone, but when you sing a reaction from a crowd live, it made me understand that type of interaction with my audience. And so when I came to Miami, no one wanted to give me a job on the radio. I started on WNMDS, which is, MDS stands for Miami-Dade South.
Okay.
And I used to talk on the radio for the cafeteria. 25 moun, oui, they're going to parler à côté. Wow. But the local nightclub called Visions of Kendall on 107th in Kendall. I asked them to give me their slowest night. Et puis, commencé à un promoteur. I went to the college, I went to the music department, and I got everybody's names and numbers, trumpet player, dancer, singer, whatever they did,
Yeah.
and I put them on stage. I did Star Search before there was Star Search. I did American Idol before there was American Idol, in 1979.
Smart.
And what I did is I created the concept, which, by the way, look it up, college night. Before I did college night, it didn't really exist.
Wow.
You bring your college ID, you get in for $1 or free, whatever it was, and you drink for, and then you got to see a performance. And that's
Nice.
how I started. And then one day the DJ was sick, the backup DJ was sick, and they said to me, by the way, you said you know how to DJ? And I DJ'd, and the rest is history. I used that platform to begin building my career in Miami.
And you said you knew how to DJ a little bit.
Yeah, like I told you,
Where'd that come from?
the last year in Haiti, when we opened up the nightclub,
Uh-huh.
my cousin and I I DJ'd, and so I got
Turntables and everything.
Real turntables, real
Real
vinyl.
turntables,
Disco,
not
people were doing the
nowadays.
hustle. It was great. I used to cafe hustle. Anyway. So, yeah, that's what saved my career because, well, after doing college night as a promoter, one day the DJ was ill. And he's a good friend of mine now, Butch De Leon. Bobby Berea, who was backup DJ, was like on vacation. And Bobby's backup was like in the hospital. I don't know. It's like they call me frantically, Mohammed, we need a DJ tonight. We heard you said you could DJ, right? I go, yes. Oh. I was like a mad scientist. Because I think I had been doing the promotion thing for at least 6 months.
Okay.
And so I played, first time on American soil. And I say this with all humility. This has happened to me many times in my career. And that is, there's certain groups you don't want to play after them. Like, you just don't want. If you ever seen MC Hammer, you don't want to get on stage after that dude.
After that, yeah.
You know what I mean? Or Roger Troutman from Zapp. Look it up. You don't want to get on stage after this dude because the audience is so captivated that they're going to be like,
Who are you?
Like,
what,
really?
What
so
is this?
when I played that night, it was Friday night, I think. The next day, the DJ came back to perform, and the audience was like, "Yo, where's Mohammed? Are you kidding me?" So the manager was like,
What?
"Really?" I said, "Yeah, that dude was awesome. How come he doesn't play here one night?" And then I became the backup DJ of the backup DJ, and
Wow,
eventually
okay.
I became. Right when I was becoming the main DJ of that spot, I have a very business mind. So I don't look at a glass and see whether it's half empty or half full. It's definitely the Jewish part, in my opinion. I say, who owns the glass? Who owns the glass? Anyway, so why am I working for you? Like, really? I need to work for myself.
I
So
like that.
I opened up a
Okay.
nightclub called Eclipse across from Dadeland Mall. And I believe that's where my career really began to shape. Because I showed people that I created a following. I literally took the people that I played to at Visions of Kendall, that was owned by Shell City Liquor. Back in the days in Miami, it was a monopoly where liquor companies could own nightclubs. I maybe shouldn't be saying this, right? So you had Big Daddy's that was owned by Crown Liquors, I think.
Okay.
And you had Visions of Kendall that was owned by Shell City. So they had it on lockdown. They were not trying to let somebody come in. And I thought, time for me to go. Opened up Eclipse, and Eclipse was, I literally opened it with my black book. I don't know if you guys understand what that means. By internet. No, my black book. Like I would call you up. Like, yo, what up, Chris? Mohammed, what are you doing? I'm not playing at Visions tonight. I'm going to be
Yeah.
at Eclipse.
Wow.
And like, all right, we'll come. They didn't care about anything else. Wherever I was, that's where they would go. And then from there, I went to a place called Club Manhattan, across from University of Miami, because the previous owners of Club Eclipse were watching the money we were making, right? Because we had a lease, and they thought we might want to take over. So
Yeah.
they came in and told me, like, by the way, you work for us now. I thought, I don't think so. I put my own club out of business in 3 months after leaving to go to Manhattan. And then when I got to Manhattan, I'm going to end the story on this note because I don't want to be bitter. I get better, not bitter. So Chris Pringle and Joel Magazine, who owned Manhattan at the time, they wanted me to come work for them.
Okay.
And I said, okay, I'm flattered by your offer. I'm 19 years old, imagine, 20. These guys are
Wow.
multi-millionaire businessmen
Right.
that own Club Manhattan. And I said, I got an idea. Why don't you sell me your club? They're like, are you kidding?
They
I said,
just
okay,
laughed.
then this conversation
They're
is
like,
over.
no.
And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I go, okay, let's be honest. I'm 19. and I'm sitting here meeting with you, obviously, I'm putting you out of business. So, unless you want me to put you out of business, sell me your club. I'll give you what's called a good faith price, because it's a, iconic club. $300,000 at the time. I could have bought Manhattan for $300,000 in 1982. And I have to throw this in there because I'm very proud of those days. When I started working at the Beat, we had artists for the first time when they had one record. Madonna, Exposé, Run DMC.
What?
Imagine Run DMC with just sucker MCs.
Yeah.
They didn't have no other record. And then, of course, they would come back when they had other records. Yeah, so I started groups like UTFO, Real Roxanne. This is way before your time. I mean, this is the foundation of rap music.
Yeah.
They all came and performed for us when they were unknown, as dance music as well. Because, of course, Madonna had only one record called Everybody, just so you know. I just thought I'd throw that in. And then from there, I went and continued to do the teen clubs. I did Skylight Express and Kendall. And I'll end on this note. When we talk about the first to do this, the first Haitian to do that, I just happened to be Haitian. When I played on South Beach, people of color weren't like...
Welcome.
Yeah, she's so diplomatic. And so I would pack the house at a club called 1235, because we didn't have a name. We called it Club 1235, which became Mansion, by the way. There were only 2 nightclubs on South Beach. Club 1235 and a place called Club New. They would change the decor like every 3 months. And eventually Warsaw came and these other clubs. But there was no McDonald's, no restaurants, no hotels, none of this. Yeah, and I put 2,000-3,000 people in that room every weekend because I was live on the radio and I said, follow the sound of my voice. So I was the first guy to like really blow up, South Beach.
Man.
In that sense.
Nice.
And made it exposed to the masses.
Right.
Yeah.
Being in the public eye for all those years. I mean, do you even remember what it was like not to be in the public eye?
Well, as a child, I was also under a lot of scrutiny. Like I told you, I grew up wearing a yarmulke 3-piece suit,
Right.
and a tie, going to public school.
You've always been...
Yeah, it's always been like,
Hey, there's that guy.
there's that kid, let's get him. So I'm okay with it, It's fine. Because when you're rooted in your faith, everything else is just a bonus,
Sometimes it bothers celebrities, people who are in the public eye, that, you don't get a private life very much.
Okay.
How do you feel about that?
You're asking me all the right questions. Well, I say this to anybody out there that has an opinion. Opinions are good, but they're facts. Here's a fact. We've been told, oh, you heard what happened to so-and-so? Either they got rich or famous and they became an a-hole or whatever, right? No. They were already that way. What money and or fame does is amplifies who you really are. So if you're a nice person with money, you're just a nicer person. Yeah, you're going to look out for people that might, not have your interest in mind, but it's not going to change who you are. So I say to celebrities, act like arrogant idiots, mean to people. They were always idiots.
That way.
They're just bigger idiots now that they're famous. Now, I understand if you have a private candlelight dinner, and someone comes to interrupt, that's just wrong. It's rude. But I say, why leave your house if you're not going to appreciate the people that got you where you are in the first place?
Okay.
You're outside. I'll give you one last thing. And this is very important to anybody out there that has heard this. Rappers say it a lot, but I don't want to just focus on rappers. They say, well, I'm not here to be like somebody's dad. I'm not a blah, blah, blah. Really? Are you crazy? Yes, you are. You are, because the minute you have a mic in your hand, you are influencing people. And you have to be responsible for what you say, because everything you say is an influencer, right? So when you say, well, I'm not, no, yes, you are. So there's no respect for that. Personally, I have no respect for anybody that's like that. I say, the more you have, the more you've accomplished, and the more influence, especially you have, the more humble you should be. Everything else is a lie.
Right. So I know this is a huge topic. I believe so. I don't want to get too deep into it,
Yes.
but I want to ask you about rap music today. What do you think about rap music today? Because I know that rap music today is not what it was before. The lyrics have changed.
Yeah.
The mentality has changed. Everything has changed. What do you think of rap music today?
So I'm going to answer you in two ways. One, I'll give you the layman's term, and then I'll give you the philosophical term behind it. So the layman's term, I can't do it better than like Chuck D. Like Chuck D, who, by the way, is from Public Enemy, right? And he was one of the first guys that was a militant rapper, right? He would talk about the situation. Once again, back it's the incredible rhyme animal, right? He was that guy.
Yeah.
But yet, he was conscious about what he said. Like I told you, every word out of his mouth, kids would know. Like, I'm repeating his rhyme 30 years later. Think about that.
Yeah.
So I know from a perspective of creativity and art, a lot of the guys who were the part of the foundation of rap will say to you, yeah, rap's not the same. It's like people don't appreciate where they came from to know where they're going. And I get it. It doesn't mean that every single rap record has to be a love song. Like LL Cool J did, I Need Love, which is a big record for him. But at the same time, do you need to tell me that you're from the ghetto? Okay, I get it. What's your solution? If you talk about a problem, offer a solution.
Right.
And that's what's missing in rap, especially conscious rap. Gangster rap. I mean, even though they were gangsters talking crazy, they were talking about solutions to get out of their situation. You see? Okay. Now let's take it from a philosophical and more esoteric standpoint. I had this conversation with a friend. I'm not going to tell you who he is yet. And I was talking to him over dinner, and I said, that music is a gift from God. And until we as adults can appreciate that, how can we teach our children? Now, in the 90s, let's go back to rap. It was the first time in, I would say, music history, where music was used to divide, not to unite. And that's why we lost Tupac. That's why we lost Biggie, right? Think about it. The division between the East Coast, West Coast thing happened overnight, and the people who didn't even know why it happened, they were like, I'm on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast.
Right.
They hate each other just because where they're from. Like Jews and Arabs. Don't get me started. Or like Dominicans and Haitians.
Oh, man.
And I'm both.
Let's not get started on that.
But watch this. Now here's where it becomes ziggy, ziggy, ziggy. Ready? Okay. Here's the problem. When life imitates art, that's when you have a problem, because art is supposed to imitate life. You want me to say that again? Art reflects life, because you can tell the state of any society based on their art and music. So if you take the 50s, right? You can go back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. You see what I'm doing in decades? The 70s, the 80s, the big hair, right? It's reflecting the situation through art and music.
Yeah.
But when life begins to imitate art, it's dangerous. So bling bling, I got a car, blah blah blah, and all the people are like, oh, he's got a nice car and guns, so I need to have a nice car and guns. That's dangerous, and that's the problem today. Thank you very much. You heard it right here.
I have to say, I love.
You've probably never heard it like that before,
no,
right? Because that's the truth.
And I
people
love
don't
it.
want to accept.
I mean, love it.
Think about it.
And I think you're absolutely right.
When you think of the Romans, what do you go to? Their art,
So
their sculptures, their music, that was what it was. Egypt, what do we have?
I think we need to get a little workshop for all
See,
the rappers
I
out
told
there.
you, be careful. You told me it was something
A
dear to
little
you.
workshop for all the
Oh, by
rappers
the way,
and the
I wanted to
artists.
say, the friend that I had this conversation with was on the VH1 Awards. He calls me up, he's like, Mohammed, check out, he goes, right when I get off stage with Stevie, as in Stevie Wonder, right? Check out what I say. So he gets off stage, VH1 honors, everybody's in the audience. I think Prince was in the audience. And he said, the song I just did, I think it's called Living for the City, offered a solution. We're talking about problems, but we offered a solution. He goes, for the first time in history, music was used to divide. He quoted my words.
Wow.
And then he goes, until we can accept that music is a gift from God, how can we teach our children? A whole group of music people, influencers, people who could go home and make a difference. You know what they did? They looked at him like, dude, you know who that was?
Who?
George Michael.
No.
Yes. Find it online. Those are my words.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for getting this on tape, because I never was able to say that on a camera. What up, George? Oh, by the way, George Michael, he told me the reason why he sang, because his father kind of disowned him for his sexuality, was because his mom was a supporter of him. And he's like, my mom's a poet, So it's her voice that I was singing,
Wow.
you know? So Denzel
Okay.
Washington wrote a book called
Which, by the way, have you ever gotten the comment that
I didn't,
you
I
look
didn't
like
say
him?
that. It's funny you say that. Yes, I get all the time I look like
Yeah.
Denzel. And I've hung out with Denzel a couple of times, which we'll talk about. But
Okay.
it's important that I mention his book. He wrote a book called The Hand That Guides Me. And he said that, and he interviewed presidents, sports figures, actors. He said every one of these people he interviewed had one thing in common. They had one situation or one person that was the hand that guided them, that put them on their path to greatness. You don't know that person, but you know the actor. In this case, I think it was his gym teacher from Mount Vernon or something. That said, you should be an actor. And he was like, actor? You know? In my case, it was my grandmother.
Okay.
So that's why I kind of threw that in.
Okay.
She was from outer space. I believe that.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, how do you mean?
Well, are you familiar with, I think it's DMT. Don't quote me, but it's a 3-letter word that stands for a chemical that we release in our body when we dream.
Okay.
You got to look it up.
Okay.
Well, you do know what it's like to dream, right?
Right.
I mean, you go places, you fly, you see premonitions. It's insane, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you want to go back in a dream because it felt so good. Well, my grandma, I came to that conclusion years after she passed away, actually.
Okay.
She had the ability to release this chemical like she's talking to you.
Wow.
And she'll be like, blah, blah, blah. You're like, Grandma, where did that come from? And she goes, inspiration. Like, no, that was some like extraterrestrial.
Was she Haitian?
No, my
No.
grandmother's from France. She was
France?
Yeah, born in France.
Okay.
And she migrated to Guadeloupe and then to Haiti. My grandfather's from Italy. He came to the Dominican Republic, and then they had children on both sides of the island.
Nice.
C'est pour ça que je me dis que c'est dominicain
Nice.
et c'est haïtien.
Okay.
Parce que fait petit dans deux côtés.
So, let's get back into your musical career.
Yes,
I know you're affiliated with Kool and the Gang.
that is correct.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Kool and the Gang, they're part of my musical roots. In 1982, although P. Diddy claims he invented the remix, in 1982, I'm having fun, right? I'm going to say something that's important. When I talk about what I did, right, I'm bragging, right? But if someone else says the exact same thing, it's called publicity. And we pay mad money for someone to say what I could say. I came out of retirement to say what I got to say. So, unless you say it, people will assume what they're told. Well, I did the first 12-inch remix in the history of Kool and the Gang in 1982, and it goes, get down on it, get down on it. You may have heard it before. I was like 20 years old, and I didn't realize that that would really be so impactful in my life until I met my manager, who took me off my couch while I was in LA doing everything but music, private jets. I was like the black Hugh Hefner wearing the robe with the mansion parties. So she asked me to go back to my roots. When I told her, I did music and all that, she didn't believe me. She was kind of like, talk to the hand. But when she heard some of my stuff, she's like, until you go back to what God put you on this earth to do, and that is music, you're never going to be happy. You're in denial. And so I came back into the business about 4 years ago. And for the past 2 years, we created an entity that is now driving most of what I do. Kool and his wife Sakina have an organization called Just Kool Enterprise. And it's about leveraging the name and likeness of Kool and the Gang. And we now do all the official after parties, the Just Kool after parties around the world. We handpick the cities.
Okay.
And I redid Get Down on It, except this time I'm the lead vocalist. So it's fun.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm one of the first DJs who happens to be Asian that also sing. So I get out there, I get behind the turntables, I do my stuff, warm up the audience, and then I jump from behind the tables and I sing fresh, Get Down on It, and celebrate.
Nice.
But new versions,
Uh-huh.
so the kids in the younger audience can relate to the music of their backdrop, it's the soundtrack of their lives. It's been a lot of fun. So that's my first musical route.
Okay. So between the time where you first started, with the remix of Kool and the Gang,
Yes.
and now, what have you been doing all this time?
Well, I mentioned to you, I lived in Miami from 79 to 96. And I did so many things as they would call a pioneer. It wasn't pioneering. I think for me, it was just solving a problem. So if there wasn't a spot that was doing certain things, I thought I could do it. And I just went in and did it without thinking.
Okay.
But there's a point where, as an artist, you have to challenge yourself. And I reached a ceiling in my career here in Miami, because Miami, most people don't realize, it's just a village. It's not really a big city. It might seem that way, but it's, you know, gossip, chisme, tripotay, right? So I felt that I had to move on. And the crazy part about it, I mentioned to you that I started on the radio at the college station for 25 people. By the time I left Miami, my 10 o'clock hour on Power 96 was the most listened to hour on the station, and the station was the most listened to station in the state of Florida, which, by the way, made Mohamed Moretta the most listened to voice in the state of Florida. I mean, so what am I going to do? Like, hey, you know, what goals? I played on South Beach, I did all these things, started a lot of different things, and it was just no more of a challenge. And then I moved to LA. But while I was here, I produced a lot of records. You know, I produced a group called Sequel, which is a local group. I remixed a few records. I worked with Diana Ross, RuPaul, Groove Theory, Dolly Parton.
Right.
And I have a great relationship with the Estefans, which we can always talk about.
Now let's talk a little bit about your situation currently in music. What are you currently doing? What's up with you right now?
Well, I'm starting to produce records for the first time again, because obviously in the last 10 years or so, the DJ has become up front.
Okay.
So I was an international DJ before it was a concept. I flew around the world and played to different audiences in different countries. Back in the day, like for example, since I was the first American DJ to play reggae on the FM dial, I became like the go-to DJ to fly to Jamaica.
Okay.
And that was great. You know, I had a lot of great times performing in Jamaica. But since I haven't made records as a producer in quite some time, I felt it was important because it's all about the music at the end of the day. I'm making records again. I'm back on the road with Kool and the Gang, like I mentioned, doing the Just Cool after parties, the official Just Cool after parties. We've also leveraged the name and likeness of Kool. We're creating a champagne called Le Cool.
Le Cool.
As long as you're cool, that's where you want to be. And there's going to be Ladies' Night coming out with the fragrance. So Ladies' Night perfume for the lovely women like yourself. Fresh cologne. But when I realized that music was what I needed to go back to, the first step was to get back behind the turntables. I've done that for the last couple of years without putting out any new music. So the first thing I'm going to start to do now is release new records under Mohamed Moretta featuring different artists. Because back in the day, like when I worked with Diana Ross, it wasn't Mohamed Moretta featuring Diana Ross.
It was Diana Ross.
Diana Ross.
Yeah.
And then the producer became big, which is where Dre came from, Teddy Riley. And now, again, it's the DJ.
Okay. And you mentioned you're on the road now and everything. You played
Last
turntables.
night. Oh, yeah,
Turntables.
of course.
But now, you rarely see that. It's more of all electronic.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I actually use the CDJs now, and I bring a USB stick because it's so much more
Tell me about that
convenient.
transition.
It's interesting you asked that. I had not DJed in about 15 years when a friend of mine, Eric Amore, who by the way lives in Monaco, he has offices there. He's the co-owner and co-founder of Nikki Beach. And we came up together on South Beach. He used to have a club called Bash, so he knows my work.
Okay.
And when I came out of retirement, we went to meet in Monaco. He's like, Mohamed, you ready? I'm like, yo, let's do this. So he calls me up and he says, yo, I got a gig. You want to DJ? I'm like, yeah. I go, when? He goes, Friday. This was on a Wednesday.
Wow.
And I'm like, where? He goes, Bulgaria. I thought, oh, this is great. So I start calling up some friends. I get online and I download some music. And then I was sitting in my hotel room in Sofia, Bulgaria, with 2 USB sticks. I'm like, this is crazy. Because before that, I was DJing with crates.
Yeah.
You know? But it's convenient, but the art of DJing hasn't changed. Only for the DJs that never DJed, meaning they use sync and they don't wear headphones and they have a set pre-recorded, or they just play the same thing over and over wherever they go. But I mean a real DJ, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of people out there that are getting bitter. Don't get bitter, just get better. So if you're a real DJ, just DJ. Don't talk about these guys that suck. Just say, hey, this is what I do. Real DJs, you have to be able to adapt to your audience. So I never play the same way, the same 2 records in a row, because it's not the same crowd every time.
Okay.
So if you feel it, you change according to the audience, you work with the energy in the room. And to me, that's the art of DJing. It doesn't matter if you know how to mix records too well, it's important, but selection is the most important.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I have to say, if there's one thing that I learned about you today,
Yes.
is that you are truly a citizen of the world.
Yeah, I like that. One world, one love.
One love. So do you have a final message for everybody watching, all our Haitian Americans and Caribbean people, everybody watching us today?
Yes. Create your own reality. Even if people think you're crazy. Be crazy, you know? I mean, Nike said it, but just do it. I mean, there's so many ways to say it.
Yeah. Well, until next time.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, and thank you for having me. See you November. On se verá na webita. Ciao. Be good or be good at it.